So when the RE3 remake came out, I was working from home at the time. It was my first real IT job, and COVID had just changed everything. I remember just sitting there after work, ready to get into the game. Now, I used to work at GameStop. I talked about that in the RE2 remake video, and I still had a good friend that worked there at the time. So instead of driving an hour to grab my copy, because I live in the middle of the woods, I just Venmo'd him and he picked it up digitally for me and sent me the code. That was my whole launch day experience with this, just sitting at home, redeeming the code, and getting into it.
Hey, wait, Jill! No!
And I was super excited for this one. I loved the RE2 remake. There was a few things that bothered me about it, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I was speedrunning the game by this point. So coming in the RE3, I was already thinking about all the hours I was going to sink into it. I remember enjoying it. I really had a good time. But I also remember getting towards the end and just not feeling the same way I did about RE2. I put it down after maybe 3 or 4 runs.
Rocket launcher? Really?
But really, I'm not here to answer whether the game's good or bad. I want to do something that I think is more interesting. I just want to understand what Resident Evil 3 Remake actually was, where it came from, what it was trying to do, and why it landed the way it did. So, what was Resident Evil 3 Remake? So to really get into what the game was, you have to go back a little bit and look at where Capcom was at when this was being made. The RE2 remake had just come out, and it really had done something pretty big for the series. People responded to it in a massive way. That slower pace, the tension, the way the environments feel like they're working against you. All of that landed really well, and that kind of reception has a way of setting expectations for whatever comes next. The interesting thing about this game is that it was already being built before any of that happened. Producer Peter Fabiano talked about that. Once the RE2 remake got greenlit, Capcom already had RE3 in mind. The idea of closing out that classic trilogy was part of the plan from early on. So these two games were running alongside each other during development. And what that really means is there wasn't much of a window to finish RE2, sit down and go through everything they learned, and carry all that forward to RE3. Most all the development for the game was handled by M2, a partner studio working with Capcom. And Resistance, the multiplayer mode that came in the box with it, was mostly handled by Neobards. Capcom was overseeing everything, but the work was spread across those two. And Resistance being in the box was a pretty thought-out decision. Producer Kawada had talked about that. The RE2 remake had 2 full campaigns, Leon and Claire, each with their own differences and their own hours. RE3 was always going to be a different shape. There's one story, one main protagonist, one night in the city. So Capcom built a multiplayer companion piece to go alongside it, and packaged them together. That was the product they were going for. The intent for RE3 itself was pretty openly stated. Capcom wanted something faster, more action-oriented. They went in and reworked movement speed, how the enemies behaved, how animations feel. The whole rhythm of playing the game. The dodge is right there at the center of everything. They even mentioned that people coming straight from RE2 Remake might feel like something was a little off, just because the systems were tuned so differently on purpose. It's the same engine, but a different game. And all this came out in April 2020, right in the middle of everything that was going on. Capcom had already flagged that physical copies were getting delayed in parts of Europe because of COVID. People were leaning heavily into digital. Everyone was home and online. And the whole conversation around this game was happening in this strange, compressed environment where everything felt a bit more intense than it normally would have. It was a weird time to launch a game. And I feel like all that's worth sitting with for a second before we get into anything else. So the first thing you notice when you start this game is that it feels faster. It's not dramatically faster, but it is consistently faster. Everything moves with a bit more urgency than you'd expect from coming off of RE2. And a big part of that comes down to who you're playing. In RE2, you're playing as Leon or Claire. Leon is a rookie cop showing up for his first day. Claire is a college student looking for her brother. Neither of them is prepared for any of this, and the game makes sure you feel that. When a zombie gets on you, your options are simple. You kill the threat, you stagger it, or you let it grab you, and you burn through a defensive item. a knife, a grenade, or something from your inventory. That's the economy in 2. The zombie has the initiative and you're managing around it. Jill Valentine, though, is somewhere else in her career entirely. She's a STARS operative. She's already survived the Spencer Mansion. She has the training and the instincts that come from actually doing this for a living, and you can really feel that the moment you start moving around with her. What she gets is the dodge, and that one change really shifts everything. When a grab comes in with Jill, you have to get a read on it, you have to time it, you have to slip the attack, and if you do it well, time slows down, the camera locks onto the zombie, you're already lined up for the shot. A moment that would have been damage and a resource loss becomes an execution. You saw it coming and you answered it, and now you're already moving again. That's a completely different feeling. The threat came to you and you handled it, and that's why the whole game feels faster even though the framework underneath is essentially the same. The speed is in how every fight finishes. Kawada talked about that they rebuilt the whole game around the premise that it leans more towards action, and that Jill's design was reconsidered through that lens entirely. And that's what makes it feel like more than just a mechanical difference. You can feel where these characters are in their lives. Leon and Claire are figuring it out as they go. Jill already knows. And the game hands you the tools to actually feel that difference in your hands. It's the same engine, but a different person, different survival instincts. So there's something that happens when you start actually getting good at the dodge. It takes a little bit to fill it. The first few hours you're still learning the timing, still occasionally eating a hit you thought you had read correctly. But then it starts clicking. The window becomes more familiar and you start trusting it, and your ammo starts stacking up. That's the thing about the dodge that I feel is the interesting part. It's a resource management tool across the whole game. Every grab you sip cleanly is a knife you didn't spend. Every attack you dodge through is a grenade still sitting in your inventory, but in RE3, those defensive items are gone entirely. Grabs are just punishment, so the dodge becomes the whole economy. The better you get at it, the more comfortable the whole game gets. Ammo builds, resources stop feeling so tight, and the game kind of opens up. And that's such an interesting loop to me, because your skill level is literally shaping how the experience feels. Someone still working out the timing is going to feel that scarcity the whole way through. Someone who has it down is going to feel like they have a little bit more room. It rewards the learning in a way that builds on itself. And then there's how the game actually populates its areas. The RE2 remake gives you a zombie or two in a hallway, and kind of lets you sit with it. You think about the angle, whether it's worth the ammo, or whether you can just get past it cleanly. There's a patience to it. RE3 fills the streets and asks you to just read it as you go. There's more bodies, wider spaces, threats coming from different directions at the same time. You're not really planning the room out anymore. You're just in it, tracking what needs your attention first, finding the movement before the next thing closes in. It feels busier, and the dodge is what keeps you from getting swallowed up by all of it. And then you get to Carlos. Carlos just feels different in your hands. He has a machine gun, he moves through a crowd with a different kind of weight to him. And the areas he covers tends to match that energy. There's more zombies, more chaos, and he's built to handle it. He also has a parry, and what that does is give him the same kind of active answer that the dodge gives Jill. He punches something, it staggers, and he creates space and keeps moving. The tool is different, but the idea is the same. You're responding to the threat directly. You're using something you do rather than something you spend. It's the same philosophy, but it's just a different set of hands. And that's why Carlos works as well as he does in the context of this game. He's running the same loop, forward motion, reading the crowd, staying active. The game just gives him different tools to do it with. Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for hanging out with me for a bit. I really appreciate you. If you're enjoying the video, consider subbing. There's a lot of content like this already on the channel, and there's always more coming. Drop a like and leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about the game. I know this remake is a game people have a lot of different feelings about, so I'd love to hear where you land on it. But let's get back into it.
That will continue to build a brighter future for all of us.
So at some point while you're playing the game, you start to notice something about how the city actually works. And it's kind of subtle at first. It feels really big. It looks like a city. There are streets, storefronts, alleyways, and the whole thing has this scale to it that really sells the idea of Raccoon City falling apart in real time. The neons are still on, barricades are going up, there's civilians still running around. So you can feel the early hours of the outbreak and how everything is dressed, and it really feels like you showed up to something that just started happening.
So many.
So you start moving through it with that energy. Like there's actually space here, like this is a place you could explore. And then a crash car blocks a road. So you cut through a building, and then debris pushes you into a side street, or a fire sends you around a corner. And slowly, without it ever feeling cheap or frustrating, you start to realize that the city has been pointing you in one direction the whole time.
You're shitting me?
Every time it looks like you could go wide, something funnels you forward. The openness is real in how it feels, but the path through is one direction, and it always has been. And that's such a specific design choice to me, because Capcom could have built this the way they built the RPD and the RE2 remake. That building is something you have to learn. You come back through it, you understand its shape over time, keys unlock doors that you passed an hour ago. Rooms reveal themselves slowly. That whole space rewards you for paying attention to it and sitting with it. The city in 3, though, rewards you for moving. The safe rooms feel like you're catching your breath for a second. You find one, you save, and sort your inventory. And you can feel the game waiting for you to step back outside. There's not really any settling into the space the way you settle into the RPD. The city here doesn't let you do that. It has too much going on, and it keeps asking you to keep up with it. And what that does to the tension is really interesting. In RE2 Remake, the dread is slow. It builds in the corners of rooms you keep going back to, or around the hallways. It lives in the uncertainty of what's still moving down a hallway you need to pass through again. You carry all that weight around the whole building, and it starts to stack up. In RE3, the tension is kinetic. It's in the things that's right in front of you, and the thing coming up behind you. It lives in the moment you're in. And the city is built to keep feeding that. Every area has a job. The streets really sell scale and panic. The inside areas create bottlenecks and pressure points. The layout keeps you moving and makes standing still feel like the wrong instinct, even when nothing is really chasing you. You just feel like you should keep going. And that really makes sense when you think about what this game is actually about at its core. This is an escape story. Jill is trying to get out. The whole thing is built around that idea of forward motion, of the city being something you move through rather than something you live in. And the actual design of every environment supports that, from the first street of the game to the last room in the lab. The city looks like a place. It plays like a direction, though. And once you feel that, you start to understand a lot of the other things about why this game is the way it is.
This is the last fucking time.
So Nemesis is interesting because depending on where you are in the game, he's actually doing 2 completely different jobs. And the first one, in my opinion, is the better one. In that early stretch of the game, before things start moving towards the subway, Nemesis operates in a way that just gets under your skin. You're already managing zombies and already reading the streets, already thinking about where you need to go next, and then he just drops out of the sky and slams into the ground in front of you. That initial landing is pretty jarring, but that's not actually the tense part for me. The tense part is when you turn and run and you hear his footsteps start, because they're really fast and they get louder. Mr. X in the RE2 remake, he was oppressive in his own way, but there was always a ceiling to how bad it could get. You could create distance, you could get room between you and him and breathe for a second. Nemesis closes that gap, he's sprinting. And when you've got your back turned and you're already threading through zombies and you can hear those footsteps slamming closer behind you, that's when it gets really tense. It's not the sight of him that does it, it's the sound of him gaining up on you. And what makes that early stretch work so well is that you never really know when it's coming. You're always in the back of your mind aware that he could show up. That awareness sits on top of everything else you're doing. Every time you turn a corner, there's a small part of your brain running the question of whether this is the moment. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And the uncertainty is what keeps the tension alive between appearances. He also changes his behavior as you damage him in those early sections, which really adds another layer to everything. He's not a static enemy, he's reacting to things you do to him. And that makes him feel like an actual presence that's actively hunting you. That fear of being hunted, it's a very specific kind of uncomfortable that's really hard to make in my opinion. And then you get past the subway and stuff changes. Nemesis is still there, and he's still pretty tense in moments, but the way those moments are delivered change a lot. He shows up in set-piece sequences, these scripted chases, boss arenas. All the encounters are designed and paced, and they escalate in specific ways that are clearly intentional.
Rocket launcher? Really?
Those moments work, some of them work really well. The spectacle is there, the execution is satisfying in some of them, and there's some pretty intense moments for how some of those fights play out. But the question of when he might show up stops being a question. You start to feel the shape of the game well enough to know that the next Nemesis moment is coming because the design is telling you it's coming. The environment changes or the music shifts and your brain goes, okay, this is the next one. That uncertainty from the first part is gone. And without the uncertainty, the fear is different. It feels more like a roller coaster. You know the drop is coming and you can feel it building, and then when it hits, it's exciting. But it's a different thing than the fear of actually not knowing. The early Nemesis feels like you're being hunted. The later Nemesis just feels like it's scripted. And that's really worth understanding because I'm not really criticizing it here. The set-piece design is confident and the boss encounters have their own kind of tension. But the game gives you something in that opening stretch that can't really sustain through the whole game. And once you've felt what that early being hunted pressure is like, you carry that standard with you through everything that comes after it. So I went over the story for RE3 in the original video, so I'm not going to rehash all that here. What I will do though is just talk about what the story is actually doing inside the remake and why it works the way it does. What it's doing is keeping you moving. The opening apartment sequence really sets that tone immediately. Jill is already in it, the city's already falling. You wake up inside the event and the game just keeps asking you to stay ahead of it.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now!
Alright, let me grab my...
And what I really appreciate about how they open this one is the way they let you feel where Jill is mentally. She's carrying the Spencer mansion with her. The PTSD is right there in the opening moments. The nightmares, the way she's living in that apartment, the weight of something that happened before the story even starts. It's a pretty small thing, but it makes her feel like a real person who survived something rather than just a character dropped into a new situation. You understand immediately that this isn't her first time in hell, she's just found a new one. And then the game just goes. The cutscenes and dialogue throughout the game are doing a pretty specific job. They give you just enough to understand what's happening and why it matters, and then they put you back in control and just keeps things moving.
You'll need to find this scientist. His vaccine research could save us all.
The story never really stops the game to explain itself, it just keeps feeding forward. And within that, there are these small human moments that land harder because of how briefly they appear.
Get off my train, shitbird!
Kendo is a really good example. In the RE2 remake video, I talked about how they took what was essentially a minor character and gave him something tragic and real. RE3 builds on that, a little more of his world, a little more weight, and it adds something without asking much of your time.
Don't do anything stupid.
Oh, that's your job, right? Take care, Jill.
It's all right, Pumpkin. It's all right. That's a good girl.
Marvin is another one, getting to see how he ends up where he is in RE2. Watching him make a very human mistake in the middle of something overwhelming, trusting someone or maybe just hoping hard enough that that hope became a decision. It's a small beat, but it makes the world feel like it has consequences that existed before you arrived. That's what the story is doing throughout the game. Furnishing the world just enough that the urgency feels earned. Every character moment's calibrated to give you something to care about, without slowing down the forward motion the game's completely built around. The story here is just fuel.
Come on. This shit better work.
So this part is where I think the real conversation around the remake lives. And I want to split it into two lanes here because they're doing two different things. This first part is just reading between the lines. Nothing in this part is provable, there's no document or interview, nothing concrete. This is just how the game reads to me when I sit with it. Because here's the thing. When you take the RE3 remake entirely on its own terms, it holds together. The pacing works, the tone is consistent, and the forward motion, it feels intentional. As its own thing, it feels like a complete game. But there are moments where something feels like it was poured tight rather than filled out. The Nemesis encounters in the back half, leaning into these big set-piece designs. Certain areas that feel like they could have had a little bit more room. And then boss encounters that essentially run the same loop twice and just add zombies to the second round. Each one of those is a small thing on its own, but across the whole game they add up.
Here comes some more!
And then there's Resistance sitting in the box alongside it. So here's my personal idea on that, and again, this is just my thoughts on it. There's nothing concrete to back this up. Resistance had a beta that went out before the game launched, and the reception to that beta was lukewarm at best. When you actually look at what was inside Resistance, there was new zombie types, new assets, things that clearly had real development time behind them. There's more visible investment there than in some parts of the main game. My thoughts is that Resistance was originally meant to be its own standalone product, 2 separate releases. And when the beta signaled that Resistance wasn't going to hold a full price tag on its own, the decision got made to package them together. RE3 became the main content that justified the bundle rather than a fully expanded remake that had been given everything it needed. That's just how the whole package feels to me. I feel like Resistance was originally the main project, and then RE3 was rushed to package them together. But now let's get into the comparisons, and this is where a lot of the divisiveness actually lives. Before we get into that, I just want to say the split around this game really isn't about quality. It's about what kind of RE3 you were expecting and whether they delivered that specific thing. Because the changes are real and they matter depending on what you value. The clock tower is gone, and for people who played the original, that location had its own atmosphere, its own kind of dread. It being gone is something you really feel. The Gravedigger fight is a big one for me. It was a weird, memorable fight that just fit the chaos of Raccoon City in a way that was its own thing. And then the big one is Nemesis. In the original, he was built around persistent, unpredictable pressure. The remake's version of that kind of lives in the early stretch we talked about, and then it moves into something way more scripted. For people who grew up with that original philosophy of Nemesis, that shift really registers as something missing. And honestly, personally, those cuts leave a mark. They're not enough for me to say that the game's bad, but they're enough to notice. What the remake put in place of those things is a tighter, faster, more kinetic experience. Streamlined forward motion, spectacle-driven escalation, and a version of Raccoon City built around panic and urgency. And for a lot of people, that trade was completely worth it. For others, the things that got left behind were load-bearing parts of what made the original feel like what it felt like. And neither of those reactions are wrong. It's just people measuring the game against different things they needed it to be. That's really what the conversation around RE3 Remake has always been. It's not good or bad, it's just, is this the RE3 you needed? So when this came out in April of 2020, the reception was genuinely split. Not really in a messy way, it was more like 2 completely honest groups of people experiencing the same game and coming away with different things. Some people played it and had a great time. It was fast and fun and confident, exactly what they wanted. Other people played it and felt like something was missing, and both those groups were right about what they felt. The conversation around it never really settled the way the RE2 remake did. RE2 landed and people kind of just agreed on it and moved on. RE3 landed and the debate stayed open, and honestly it's still open now. People are still talking about it, still feeling strongly about it in different directions, which is kind of its own legacy, because a game that nobody cared about doesn't stay in the conversation years later.
Bitch can't even swim.
Commercially, it found its audience. It kept selling, it kept getting picked up on sales and ports and bundles. The numbers grew over the years, the way evergreen games do. It wasn't the phenomenon RE2 Remake was, but it did carve out its own place in the catalog. And I think the reason the conversation never fully closed is because the game hints at a bigger version of itself. The early Nemesis sections show you what a fully realized hunt could have felt like. The moments where the city opens up show you what more space could have done. Those glimpses create this kind of friction where you're playing something that's good and also aware that it was reaching for something just slightly beyond where it landed. That feeling is what keeps people coming back to the discussion. Almost 6 years out, RE3 Remake sits in an interesting place in the series. People who came to it fresh with no original to compare it to tend to love it. People who grew up with the 1999 game tend to have a more complicated relationship with it, and people who just want a fast, replayable, kinetic survival horror game tend to keep coming back to it. All those people are describing the same game. The remake is an escape story, built from the ground up to keep you moving forward. And everything it is, everything it does well, everything people love about it, and everything people wished had been different, all of it traces back to that. Everything in this game was built to make you escape it. That's what it was trying to be. That's what it was. And now you know. And that's Resident Evil 3 Remake. If you made it to the end, seriously thank you for hanging out with me for a bit. If you enjoyed it, consider subbing. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of content already on the channel, and there's always more coming. Drop a like and leave a comment. Let me know where you land on this one. I understand it's a game that really hits differently depending on who you are and what brought you to it, so I'd really love to hear your side of it. I also want to give a massive shout out to all the channel members and to everyone that supported the stream for Resident Evil with Super Chats. I really appreciate you all. But thank you again, and as always, I'll see y'all later.
The